The Praetorian Guard was a famous unit of the Roman Empire, whose reputation evokes mixed feelings of awe, fear, and mystery. In the popular imagination, they are often equated to modern forces such as the elite commandos of the SAS or the Republican Guard troops, which have propped up dictators such as Saddam Hussein. Even in the historical realm, their role has been subject to doubt, with some in the past perceiving them as a ceremonial unit equipped with archaic armor designed only for show. So, who were they? Special forces, dictatorial muscle men, or ceremonial relics? Let's find out.
You can get your hands on your own Praetorians through today's sponsor, Victrix, creators of historically accurate miniatures spanning all the way from the Greco-Persian Wars to the Napoleonic era and World War II. I've actually drooled over these minis for a long time now, and when we found out that the Victrix folks were also fans of ours, we had to team up. I mean, just look at these Imperial Legionaries. The 28mm plastic models are bursting with detail, which is a testament to Victrix's obsession with historical accuracy and producing the finest historical miniatures on the market. The kit comes with a huge variety of options for poses, armor, weapons, standards, skins, torches, and even severed heads for your soldiers to hold as trophies. With these, you can make officers like a Signifer and a Cornican, or transform the whole lot to look like Praetorians with fantastic, easy-to-use shield design transfers. Best of all, Victrix has created an exclusive deal for our viewers, including Roman Legionaries, paints, and shield transfers for a bundle deal that's 20% off. So start building your own Roman Legion worthy of fighting for the Empire by clicking the link below or going to victrixlimited.com/invicta. Enjoy!
The tradition of Roman bodyguards dates back to the earliest history of its armed forces. In the very beginning, Roman warfare was quite tribal and primitive in nature. During these days of the early monarchy, it revolved around war bands led by chieftains and their close retinue. As their military evolved, however, the mass of warriors became more organized. During this period, the generals still relied on household troops for protection, but increasingly specific units within the army were assigned this role whilst on campaign. At first, it seems that these would have been Roman citizens. Their selection was particularly important when monarchy turned to republic and the new government needed to ensure its own safety. Soon, however, the pool of potential bodyguard candidates was expanded. For instance, during the early Republic, it became practice for 1/3 of the Allied cavalry and 1/5 of the Allied infantry to be selected as the extraordinarii. It was this elite group which took on many critical roles for the army and tented closest to the general in camp. As a result, their members also came to be tapped to serve alongside the Roman bodyguards. At this point, however, the unit was not yet institutionalized. Rather, it remained a temporary, ad hoc collection of individuals who together accompanied a commander. In the field, these men would have been welcome guests in the general's tent, known as the Praetorium. As such, they might be referred to informally as the Cohors Praetoria. Over the centuries, their composition would naturally have fluctuated. For instance, the general Scipio Aemilianus was famous for selecting 500 men to guard him against enemy sorties during the siege of Numantia, while Julius Caesar grew fond of keeping a band of Germanic cavalrymen close by his side over the course of his campaigns. By the late 1st century BC, it seems that this practice became more regularized, as loyalties began to revolve around powerful men rather than the state. Following the death of Julius Caesar, both Antony and Octavian divided between them 8,000 veterans, many of whom had fought under the dictator. These in turn were formed into multiple cohortes praetoriae, as a part of either triumvir's own personal Praetorian Guards. When both men turned on one another, their Praetorians became involved in the fighting and, on occasion, faced each other directly. After his victory at Actium in 31 BC, Octavian united his forces with those of his opponent in a symbolic reunification of Julius Caesar's army. This resulted in the existence of 9 Praetorian cohorts after the war, fielding a maximum of 5,400 men. Rather than disband these units, Octavian decided to keep them in his service as a peacetime security force. Ever the prudent ruler, he was extremely wary of blatantly flaunting his newfound power and only billeted 3 cohorts around the city of Rome, with the rest scattered throughout Italy. Over the course of his reign, their role would gradually morph to the needs of the new administration. In 2 BC, Octavian, now named Augustus, bureaucratized their structure by appointing 2 Praetorian prefects to take overall command of the cohorts, which had previously functioned independently. By the end of his reign, the Guard was on its way to becoming enmeshed into the fabric of imperial rule. Now, let us take a closer look at the soldiers who made up the ranks of this Praetorian Guard. As a military force, the Praetorians were heavy infantry, trained and equipped like legionaries. However, some of their gear was considerably more ornate and included unique emblems. Praetorian helmets, for instance, appear to have sported a tall horsehair crest with elaborate details worked into the metal. Shields were similarly well decorated and maintained a rounded shape, as opposed to the increasingly rectangular scutum of the early empire. Each legion had its own emblem displayed on its shield, and the Praetorian Guard were one of only a handful of units known to use the thunderbolt design. Evidence suggests that each Praetorian cohort had its own unique variant. Additionally, wings, stars, and crescents were probably painted on their shield boards, with scorpions featuring prominently as well. Guard units were also unique in that their standard bearers wore lion skin capes as opposed to the bearskin capes of their legionary counterparts. The standards themselves used the image of Victoria, winged goddess of victory, and were so heavily decorated with awards that men reportedly had difficulty carrying them on long marches. The rest of a Praetorian's kit matched what the average soldier wore. This might include mail, scale, or the famed lorica segmentata. Swords, daggers, and pila were also standard fare. The key difference between regular and guard units was that the Praetorians were often far removed from the threat of combat. As such, they rarely made full use of their equipment outside of the parade ground. Instead, they could be seen carrying a pilum and shield with tunics, neck scarves, and cloaks rather than armor. Depending on their duties, a guardsman might even wear a toga to reflect civilian garment, but still remain conspicuous in a crowd. But how would one become a Praetorian Guard in the first place? Records indicate that they were originally legionaries hand-picked from among the active units of the army. Under Augustus, their recruiting grounds were strictly restricted to Etruria, Umbria, Latium, and the old legion colonies in Italy. This was eventually expanded to include Spain, Macedonia, and Noricum, which were some of the most prosperous and Romanized parts of the empire. During the reign of Septimius Severus, the doors were opened up to all legionaries, and most recruits came from the provinces. Dio said this made transfer to the Praetorians a kind of prize for those who proved brave in war. To others, this shift eroded the perceived elite nature of the Guard. Generally speaking, the men were recruited between the ages of 15 and 32. slightly broader than the typical range of between 18 and 23 for most legionaries. A man would need to be physically fit, of good character, and from a respected family. Letters of recommendation were very important, and proper patronage could open many doors. Upon being admitted, guardsmen would enjoy several unique benefits related to enlistment and pay. For instance, basic legionaries had a typical 25-year service length. By contrast, Mark Antony had initially set a 12-year enlistment period for his Praetorian Guard, which Augustus raised to 16 years. Over time, this service length would remain lower than that of regular troops. In terms of pay, Augustus established the Praetorian rate as double that of legionaries. Under Tiberius, this was increased to triple pay, where the guard received 720 denarii per year compared to the 225 of the legionaries. This differential is likely to have remained in place throughout the history of the guard. Additionally, it became custom for each new emperor to win the troops over by giving them gifts of money known as donatives. Naturally, it made sense to secure the goodwill of the Praetorian Guard, and so they were paid exorbitant bribes to the tune of 3,750 denarii a man under Claudius and 5,000 denarii under Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Upon retirement, Praetorian Guards could expect continued preferential treatment. They received discharge bonuses of 5,000 denarii, as opposed to 3,000 denarii, which was standard for the legions. In addition, the Praetorians would be presented with bronze diplomas, which automatically legitimized their first marriage and the children born of them. Soldiers who had received their discharges might also go on to enlist in evocati units. Now, let us look at the organization of the Praetorian Guards. Each century was led by a centurion, while each cohort was led by a tribune, and the entire group was led by a prefect. There were initially 9 cohorts under Augustus, with a max of 16 being recognized under Vitellius. The amount of men in each cohort is also disputed, but it seems that they were inflated compared to a typical legion, fluctuating somewhere between 500 and 1,500 men each. This results in a theorized total strength of around 6,000 men under Augustus and 12,800 under Vitellius. Attached to the Praetorian Guard were the 300 cavalrymen of the Speculatores Augusti. In a parallel to the legions, these were intended to be the eyes and ears of the force. While abroad, this might mean exploring and scouting, while back in Rome, it might mean spying and conducting other clandestine operations. Little is known about their secretive affairs. Now that we've covered the organizational framework of the Praetorian Guard, we can explore how one might advance through it. The basic ladder for promotion consisted of the following: induction into the Guard and service as a probatus under one of the centuries in a cohort. Several years of good service could lead to the post of an immunis, who might serve as a clerk or technician. Next up, one could receive double pay by becoming a tesserarius, entrusted with passing on the watchword, an optio, who served as the centurion's deputy, or as a signifer, who carried the standards. Highly literate and numerate soldiers could be appointed to the Praetorian prefect's staff. Only a small number of soldiers would ever be able to progress onto the enormously prestigious and well-paid rank of centurion in the Praetorian Guard. This position was the culmination of a long career and held no restrictions on the length of service. The highest echelons of the Praetorian Guard were extremely selective. Tribunes who led each Praetorian cohort were Roman knights with extensive resumes. They usually would have passed through the ranks of the guard and transferred to a legion where they served as a centurion, then senior centurion, and finally primus pilus, followed then by a year as tribune in the vigiles and another in the urban cohorts. Other paths were available, but nevertheless, the year-long term as tribune of the Praetorian Guard attracted veterans with remarkable military experience. The highest post of Praetorian Prefect was such a powerful position that it was almost unheard of for an individual to attain it through conventional promotion. Instead, this position was generally held by appointees of the emperor. These prefects were amongst the most influential men in the empire, and some would even go on to become emperors themselves. So, what were the typical duties of this powerful force? As discussed, the Praetorian Guard was founded on active wartime units and was thus expected to accompany the emperor on campaigns. In this capacity, they were fairly active in the early empire, seeing action in several major campaigns across Iberia, Germania, and Dacia, where they performed in battle much like any other elite infantry unit. For the most part, however, the Praetorian Guard was comfortably back at Rome. Here, they were tasked with a variety of duties requiring loyal operatives and large numbers of trained personnel. Primarily, they provided security for the imperial household and palaces, but also stationed a cohort to keep order at the games and theatres. The Praetorians operated the city prison, carrying out death sentences imposed by the emperor and senate. Additionally, they partook in routine civic administration of the city, with tasks ranging from map-making to engineering work. In later years, however, some of their elements increasingly functioned as political operatives who meddled in the affairs of Rome and the empire. But to get a better sense of their role, let us now review their service history. We can pick up the story again with the activities of the Praetorian Guard under Augustus. As discussed, they were billeted in Italy, where they largely helped keep the peace and gradually took on civil duties. In terms of actual combat in this period, it seems that they only saw action when accompanying Augustus personally on campaign. This was actually quite rare, as most of his wars were fought by trusted lieutenants. The major exception to this was the Cantabrian War, which began shortly after he was made emperor. It was a bloody conflict of guerrilla fighting in difficult terrain, which necessitated the deployment of 8 legions. Augustus saw fit to personally bolster the conflict, but was only there for about a year until illness drew him away. It is unclear how much fighting the Praetorians saw, but their contribution was likely quite minimal, as the war would drag on for a full decade. When Tiberius succeeded Augustus in 14 AD, he chose to maintain the guard. Soon, the new emperor was met with unrest in Pannonia and the Rhine. The former was dealt with by the son of Tiberius, who was given 2 Praetorian cohorts, while the latter was dealt with Germanicus and his 2,000-strong guard detachments. Affairs in Germania were significantly more intense for the Praetorians, who were present at both the 16 AD Battle of Edistaviso and the Battle of the Angravarian Wall. It was in the second of these engagements when they were most bloodied during the heavy assault upon the enemy's forested flank. In these military endeavors, the Praetorians proved to be capable soldiers, often fighting toe-to-toe with other veteran units. During the reign of Tiberius, the Praetorians continued to rise in importance. The Praetorian prefect, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, became a close advisor to the emperor and exerted significant influence over the ruler. In 23 AD, Sejanus managed to bring all the Praetorian cohorts to Rome by constructing a fortified garrison atop the Viminal Hill. This camp became known as the Castra Praetoria. The structure was roughly 2/3 the size of a legionary fortress from the frontier and covered 17 hectares with surrounding 3.5-meter walls. Later construction would substantially raise the height of the curtain wall and add new battlements and towers. From this position, Sejanus was able to consolidate his hold on power and pursue his own ambitions. The Praetorian prefect embarked on a ruthless program of eliminating his rivals, which included poisoning the emperor's son, Drusus. His conspiracy to claim the throne was eventually revealed in 31 AD, and he was killed along with his conspirators. Such abuse of power would prove to be the recurring theme for the Praetorian Guard. As the largest armed force in Rome, they carried tremendous leverage over the emperor and showed themselves unwilling to put their privileged position at risk. Thus, the Guard played an important role in each ensuing transition of power during the reign of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. In 37 AD, they helped Caligula succeed Tiberius, but later helped assassinate him in 41 AD. In the aftermath, they hauled out his uncle Claudius from the palace and proclaimed him emperor. This would be the first of several instances where they literally played the role of kingmaker. When Claudius died, they next supported Nero, before later abandoning him and eventually getting enmeshed in the chaos which followed during the Year of the Four Emperors. During this time, many of their ranks were purged, and when the Flavians took power, their units were reformed to support the new dynasty. Under these new rulers, the Guard was led once again into battle against the Germanic and Dacian tribes. At the end of the 1st century AD, the Praetorians were front and center in the tumultuous transition to the following Antonine dynasty. More executions and disbandments followed, but the future of the Guard was secured when it supported Trajan, who went on to become emperor. Under this commander, the Praetorians returned in force to the battlefield, taking part in both the Dacian and Parthian wars. Over the course of the 2nd century, they would continue to see action on the borders of the empire, which diminished their ability to stir up trouble at home. However, in 180 AD, Emperor Commodus would bring the Guards back to Rome. They quickly reoriented to this political battlefield and were back to scheming. In 192, their prefect helped direct the plot against Commodus, and the Guardsmen were rewarded by the new emperor Pertinax with payments of 3,000 denarii. They returned the favor by assassinating him within 3 months. In the greatest scandal to date, the Praetorians then offered up the crown of the entire empire to the highest bidder. It would be bought by Didius Julianus for 25,000 sesterces. Understandably, his reign did not go unchallenged, and when Septimius Severus swept down to seize Rome with the armies of the Danube, the entire Praetorian Guard was understandably dissolved. Yet their function was still critical, and its units were reformed from the loyal elements of Severus's forces. As was now a familiar pattern, the Praetorian Guard of the new Severan dynasty initially distinguished itself in external wars before inevitably dishonoring itself with internal politicking. The question of who watches the watchers was certainly a pressing one over the following centuries. To answer it, some emperors did attempt to rein in the power of the Praetorian Guard. Septimius Severus, for instance, believed that recruiting troops too familiar with politics in Rome was dangerous, and thus made it a policy to draw guardsmen from frontier legions. Others sought to limit their role or have tighter control of their officers. But this was a dangerous game to play, especially during the civil wars of the 3rd century. Yet, as control was finally reasserted At the end of this period, it presented an opportunity to finally begin to make more aggressive changes. For instance, Diocletian's rule in 285 AD introduced the Jovia and Herculiana city legions, which undermined the Praetorians' influence. Sensing that now might be the time to do away with the unit, Galerian ordered their disbandment. Yet he may have struck too soon, as the Praetorians now turned to Maxentius and proclaimed him emperor. This would now put them on a collision course with Constantine the Great, who marched upon Rome to take control of the West. The two would clash climactically at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. Unfortunately for the Praetorians, they and Maxentius would be defeated. In the aftermath, Constantine now permanently disbanded the Praetorian Guard. After more than 3 centuries of existence, they were now the ones cut down in front of the throne. In their place would rise new units of bodyguards such as the Scoli Palatini and Varangian Guards. The last vestige of the Praetorians would be the position of Praetorian Prefect, which served as a financial administrator in Rome. Eventually, this too would fade away. We can now reflect back on our initial question: who were the Praetorian Guards? Special forces, dictatorial musclemen, or ceremonial relics? The short answer is none of these. The Praetorians were not equivalent to modern special forces, though at first the Guard did represent cream-of-the-crop troops. They were largely removed from frontline military action and spent most of their time taking on domestic missions of a civil and administrative nature. The Praetorians were somewhat similar to dictatorial musclemen in that they served as tools of a thinly veiled military regime seeking to control the population and political opposition. Over time, though, they grew their own independence and often played the role of puppet master themselves. Finally, the Praetorians were not ceremonial relics. This flies in the face of their active participation in many important military campaigns and their contributions, for better or worse, to the political destiny of the Roman Empire. In the end, we should perhaps best reflect on the story of the Praetorian Guard as a reminder that absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that security often comes at the price of freedom. I hope you've appreciated our exploration of the rich history of the Praetorian Guard. What units of history would you like to see us cover next? You can head over to our Patreon to participate in polls, catch script previews, and get HD downloads of all our art. We owe a huge debt to our current patrons for funding the channel and to our researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.